Imagine a couple on the run. Their names whispered in fear, yet etched in a romantic haze by a public desperate for escapism during one of the bleakest times in American history. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were more than just criminals. They became cultural icons, embodying both the desperation and defiance of the Great Depression. Their story is one of love, violence, betrayal, and ultimately, a fiery end that left an indelible mark on American history. The exact story of how Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow first crossed paths has been retold in countless ways, but one of the more reliable accounts places their meeting on January 5, 1930. It happened in West Dallas, at the home of Clyde's friend Clarence Clay, located on 105 Herbert Street. Bonnie, then 19, was staying with a friend, helping her recover from a broken arm. Clyde, 20 at the time, arrived at the house while Bonnie was in the kitchen making hot chocolate. Their connection was instantaneous, a spark that would ignite a notorious partnership in crime. Historians generally agree that Bonnie joined Clyde out of love. From the moment they met, she stood by him, steadfast even as they embarked on a crime spree that would turn them into infamous outlaws. After Clyde's release from prison in February 1932, he teamed up with Ralph Fultz to plan a series of robberies. Their targets were small businesses and gas stations, easier and quicker to hit than large banks. Their ultimate aim? To amass enough weapons and money to launch a daring raid on Easton Prison, where Clyde had endured brutal conditions. But things didn't go as planned. On April 19th, during a failed hardware store robbery in Kaufman, Texas, Bonnie and Fultz were arrested. Their goal had been to steal firearms, but the operation fell apart. Bonnie spent a few months in jail, writing poetry to pass the time, before being released due to a lack of evidence. Fultz, however, wasn't as lucky. He was convicted and served time, severing his ties with the gang. Within weeks of her release, Bonnie reunited with Clyde, setting the stage for a crime spree that would grip the nation. On April 30th, 1932, Clyde drove the getaway car during a robbery in Hillsborough, Texas. Although he never left the vehicle, store owner J.N. Booker was shot and killed during the incident. Booker's wife later identified Clyde from police photos, marking him as a wanted man. The violence escalated on August 5th, when Clyde, alongside Raymond Hamilton and Ross Dyer, was drinking moonshine at a dance in Stringtown, Oklahoma. Sheriff C.G. Maxwell and Deputy Eugene Moore confronted the group in the parking lot. Clyde and Hamilton opened fire, killing Deputy Moore, the first of 9 law enforcement officers the gang would murder during their spree. Later that year, on Christmas Day, Clyde and 16-year-old W.D. Jones, who had joined the gang the night before, murdered Doyle Johnson in Temple, Texas, during a car theft. A few weeks later, on January 6, 1933, Clyde killed Deputy Malcolm Davis during a police ambush. By this point, the gang had left 5 bodies in their wake. In March 1933, Clyde's brother, Buck Barrow, received a pardon and rejoined Clyde, bringing along his wife, Blanche. The 5-member gang, including Bonnie, Clyde, Jones, Buck, and Blanche, set up a hideout in Joplin, Missouri. Their time in Joplin was anything but low-key. Late-night, boisterous card games, frequent comings and goings, and even Clyde accidentally discharging a rifle inside the apartment attracted unwanted attention. Neighbors, suspecting illegal activity, tipped off the police. On April 13th, law enforcement arrived in 2 vehicles to confront the gang. A violent shootout ensued. Detective Harry L. McGinnis was killed on the spot, and Constable J.W. Harriman was fatally wounded. Bonnie reportedly wielded a Browning automatic rifle bar, forcing Highway Patrol Sergeant G.B. Kaler to take cover behind a tree. Amid the chaos, the gang escaped, but not without leaving behind vital clues. Among the items left behind were Buck's parole papers, a stockpile of weapons, Bonnie's poetry, and rolls of undeveloped film. The photos, once developed, revealed playful, yet provocative images of the gang. One in particular stood out, Bonnie posing with a cigar in her teeth and a pistol in her hand. This image, sensationalized by the press, solidified the duo as criminal superstars in the public eye. As newspapers splashed photos and stories of the Barrow gang across their pages, Bonnie and Clyde became household names. They were young, wild, and seemingly in love, a tantalizing image that fascinated Depression-era America. While other criminals like John Dillinger had charm and nicknames like Pretty Boy Floyd drew attention, Bonnie and Clyde had something unique, the allure of forbidden romance. Despite their celebrity, life on the run took its toll. The gang was constantly moving, stealing cars, and hiding in remote locations. They often camped outdoors, cooking over campfires and bathing in cold streams to avoid detection. The cramped quarters of their stolen cars led to bickering and tension among the group. In June 1933, the gang's luck took a turn for the worse. While driving near Wellington, Texas, Clyde missed a warning sign for a bridge under construction. Their car flipped into a ravine. Bonnie suffered severe burns to her leg, leaving her unable to walk. The injury was so gruesome that her bones were visible in places. Despite her condition, the gang continued their criminal activities. They kidnapped law enforcement officers, fled shootouts, and narrowly escaped capture time and again. The gang's notoriety had made them desperate. They could no longer safely stay in motels or eat in restaurants without risking exposure. This constant evasion pushed them further into isolation and violence. Tensions within the group reached a breaking point when W.D. Jones temporarily left in frustration. When he rejoined, the group was fractured and discontented. By mid-1933, the gang's chaotic spree had turned into a desperate fight for survival, and their downfall was becoming inevitable. Bonnie and Clyde's tale is one of love, defiance, and violence, forever etched into American history. Their crimes horrified the nation, yet their images and exploits captivated the public's imagination. They were both victims of circumstance and architects of their demise, a duo whose lives burned bright and ended in tragedy. In July 1933, the infamous Barrow gang checked into the Red Crown Tourist Court just south of Platte City, Missouri. The establishment, consisting of 2 brick cabins connected by garages, became their temporary hideout. They rented both cabins, drawing immediate attention. The Red Crown Tavern, located nearby, was a popular hangout for Missouri highway patrolmen. Despite this, the gang's actions were anything but discreet. Blanche Barrow, Clyde's sister-in-law, registered their stay for 3 guests, but the observant owner, Neil Hauser, noted 5 individuals getting out of the car. To make matters even more suspicious, the driver parked the car in reverse, gangster style, for a quick getaway. Blanche's peculiar choice to pay with coins instead of bills, both for the cabins and meals, further raised eyebrows. The next day, their behavior grew even more conspicuous. Newspapers were taped over the cabin windows, and Blanche's outfit, jodhpur riding breeches, was so out of place for a woman in the area that locals remembered it decades later. Concerned, Hauser reported the group to Captain William Baxter of the Highway Patrol, who frequented the nearby restaurant. Meanwhile, Clyde Barrow and W.D. Jones ventured into town to gather supplies for Bonnie Parker, who was still suffering from severe burns on her leg. Their purchase of medical bandages and atropine sulfate caught the attention of a local pharmacist, who alerted Sheriff Holt Coffey. Coffey, already on the lookout for suspicious activity following tips from Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas authorities, placed the cabins under surveillance. Reinforcements, including an armored car, were called in. On the night of July 20th, Sheriff Coffey and his team surrounded the cabins, armed with Thompson submachine guns. A violent shootout erupted. Despite the officers' heavy firepower, Barrow's .30 caliber Browning automatic rifle bar, stolen earlier from a National Guard armory, proved superior. The gang escaped once again, taking advantage of confusion when a stray bullet short-circuited the armored car's horn, causing officers to mistake it for a ceasefire signal. The escape came at a cost. Buck Barrow, Clyde's brother, was gravely injured with a gunshot wound that exposed his skull, and Blanche was nearly blinded by shattered glass. The gang retreated to an abandoned amusement park near Dexter, Iowa, known as Dexfield Park. There, Buck's condition worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, prompting the gang to dig a grave in preparation for his death. Locals spotted the wounded fugitives, and authorities, joined by a crowd of onlookers, surrounded the park. Another intense gunfight followed. Clyde, Bonnie, and Jones managed to escape on foot, but Buck and Blanche were captured. Buck succumbed to his injuries and pneumonia 5 days later. For weeks, the remaining gang members ranged across the country, from Colorado to Mississippi, committing robberies to sustain themselves. In August, Clyde and Jones raided an armory in Illinois, replenishing their arsenal with more bars, handguns, and ammunition. By September, they risked a trip back to Dallas to visit their families. It was during this time that Jones parted ways with the gang, heading to Houston, where he was later arrested without resistance. Despite their growing notoriety, Clyde and Bonnie faced constant peril. In November, an attempt to meet their families near Sowers, Texas, nearly ended in capture. Detectives, lying in wait, opened fire on the couple's car, injuring both Clyde and Bonnie in the legs. They narrowly escaped into the night. The law was catching up. In January 1934, Clyde staged the infamous Eastham prison breakout, freeing several inmates, including Raymond Hamilton and Henry Methvin. During the raid, gang member Joe Palmer shot Major Joe Crowson, who later died of his injuries. This brazen act brought the full force of the Texas and federal governments down on the gang. Lee Simmons, the head of the Texas Department of Corrections, vowed to see every participant in the raid hunted down and killed. Enter Frank Hamer, a retired Texas Ranger with a fearsome reputation. Persuaded by Simmons to come out of retirement, Hamer was tasked with dismantling the Barrow gang. Known for his relentless pursuit and sharp instincts, Hamer tracked the gang's every move. He shadowed them for months, always just one step behind. On Easter Sunday, 1934, the gang struck again. Near Grapevine, Texas, Highway Patrolman H.D. Murphy and Edward Bryant Wheeler stopped to assist what appeared to be a stranded motorist. Instead, they were ambushed. Accounts differ, but either Methvin or Parker fired the first shots, killing both officers. The cold-blooded attack made national headlines, further solidifying the gang's image as ruthless killers and escalating the urgency of the manhunt. As spring unfolded, tales of the Grapevine killings spread wildly, with each retelling becoming more sensationalized. Local newspapers in Dallas amplified the drama, recounting a farmer's claim that Bonnie Parker laughed hysterically as Patrolman H.D. Murphy's head bounced like a rubber ball when she shot him. Stories even emerged about a cigar, but allegedly bearing Parker's tiny teeth marks. Meanwhile, Murphy's grieving fiancée attended his funeral in her wedding dress. A poignant image splashed across newspaper front pages, adding to the storm of public outrage. While the farmer's story was eventually discredited, the damage had been done. The Barrow gang was now public enemy number one, and the cry for their capture, or death, reached fever pitch. Texas Highway Patrol Chief L.G. Fairs put out a $1,000 bounty on their dead bodies, with Governor Ma Ferguson adding $500 more for each killer. This marked the first time Bonnie herself had a price on her head, solidifying her as a murderer in the public's eyes. The hostility toward the gang escalated further when Clyde Barrow and Henry Methvin killed Constable William Cal Campbell in Commerce, Oklahoma. They then kidnapped Police Chief Percy Boyd, later releasing him in Kansas with a clean shirt and a peculiar request from Parker: "Tell the world I don't smoke cigars." Despite her protest, Boyd's identification of the outlaws fueled the perception of Bonnie as a ruthless killer. The Dallas Journal captured the public sentiment with an editorial cartoon, an empty electric chair marked "Reserved for Clyde and Bonnie." By May 1934, Clyde Barrow was a wanted man across 4 states, with 16 warrants for crimes ranging from robbery and car theft to murder. Frank Hamer, the former Texas Ranger tasked with taking down the gang, had methodically studied their movements since February. Clyde's patterns were predictable. His travels revolved around family visits, often circling the edges of 5 Midwestern states to exploit jurisdictional limits. Hamer knew Clyde would eventually head to Louisiana to see Henry Methvin's family, unaware that Methvin's parents' home was also a fallback meeting point for the gang. Hamer assembled a 6-man posse that included Texas officers and local Louisiana lawmen. On May 21, 1934, the group set up an ambush along a quiet stretch of Highway 154 near Gibbsland, Louisiana. For hours, they lay hidden waiting. Finally, on the morning of May 23, Clyde's Ford the 5th 8 appeared, speeding toward them. Methvin's truck had been strategically placed on the roadside, luring Clyde to slow down. The posse opened fire as the car approached. Frank Hamer's team fired relentlessly, unleashing a hailstorm of bullets. Clyde was struck first, killed instantly by a shot to the head. Bonnie screamed before a barrage of gunfire silenced her. In the end, their car was riddled with over 130 bullets. When the shooting stopped, the lifeless bodies of Bonnie and Clyde were slumped in the Ford, marking the violent end of their infamous run. The scene quickly devolved into chaos as word of the ambush spread. Crowds of curious onlookers swarmed the site, turning it into a macabre spectacle. Souvenir hunters stripped the vehicle, cutting locks of Bonnie's blood-soaked hair and pieces of her dress. One man reportedly attempted to sever Clyde's finger as a keepsake. The officers struggled to control the frenzy, ultimately towing the bullet-riddled car, with the bodies still inside, to a nearby funeral home. In Arcadia, Louisiana, the small town's population exploded from 2,000 to 12,000 within hours. People arrived by every means imaginable: cars, trains, and even airplanes. Local businesses capitalized on the spectacle, hiking prices on food and drinks. Amid the chaos, Bonnie and Clyde's families came to identify their bodies, each consumed by grief. Though Bonnie and Clyde had wished to be buried side by side, their families denied the request. Bonnie's funeral drew a staggering 20,000 mourners, while Clyde's was a more private affair. They now rest in separate cemeteries in Dallas, Texas, their graves attracting countless visitors over the decades. The ambush of Bonnie and Clyde marked the beginning of the end for America's notorious gangsters of the Great Depression. New federal laws made crimes like bank robbery and kidnapping federal offenses, and law enforcement coordination improved. In the months that followed, other infamous criminals met similar fates. John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Babyface Nelson all fell to law enforcement's tightening grip. To this day, Bonnie and Clyde's story continues to fascinate, a blend of romance, rebellion, and tragedy that has cemented their place in American folklore. The story of Bonnie and Clyde is a complex tapestry of love, crime, and myth. Their lives offer a glimpse into a desperate era, where outlaws became heroes and reality blurred with fiction. What do you think? Are they romantic figures defying the odds, or symbols of lawlessness and chaos? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the secret world of history's most infamous figures. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.